Her heart beat like a trapped bird, each flutter a countdown to her last breath. With every full moon, Astrid Vale faded, a ghost in her own skin. But she didn't know that the monster chained in the castle's heart held the key to her survival. She didn't know that his curse was the other half of hers, or that their meeting would ignite a love that could shatter chains and rewrite fate. But as she took her first step into the forbidden depths, one question burned brighter than the moon. Could two cursed souls find salvation in each other's darkness? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The full moon was a night away, a silent predator stalking her from beyond the grimy window pane. In her small, cluttered room, tucked away in a forgotten wing of the castle, Astrid Vale felt its pull like a physical tide. It was a familiar chill, a creeping lethargy that began in her fingertips and spread inward, promising a cold stillness that felt more final this time. Her room, a chaotic sanctuary of knowledge, smelled of dust and the slow death of wilting herbs. Bunches of dried nightshade and wolfsbane hung from the rafters, their brittle leaves crumbling at the slightest touch, their protective properties having long since failed her. Stacks of arcane books, their spines cracked and their pages whispering of forgotten lore, leaned against every available surface. They were her only companions in a life defined by the steady, inexorable draining of her own vitality. The curse was a grim inheritance, passed down through the women of her line, a cruel fairy tale made flesh. With every lunar cycle, her heart weakened, its rhythm growing more erratic, more fragile. She was a flickering candle, and tomorrow night's moon threatened to be the gust of wind that would finally extinguish her flame. She tried to lift a particularly heavy tome from a stack, its leather cover embossed with a faded silver spiral, but her arm trembled with a pathetic weakness. The book slipped, thudding onto the floorboards with a sound that seemed to echo the heavy, struggling beat of her own heart. She gasped, leaning against the table, her breath catching in her throat as black spots danced in her vision. It was getting worse, faster than ever before. She caught her reflection in a tarnished silver mirror hanging on the wall, a relic of a time when her family had held a more esteemed position. The woman staring back was a stranger, her skin so pale it was nearly translucent, her eyes wide and dark in a face that had lost all its youthful color. She looked like a ghost already, a phantom haunting the edges of her own life. Her desperation was a physical ache, a sharp counterpoint to the dull, pervasive weakness. There had to be another way. Her ancestors had fought this, searched for a cure, and failed. But they had not had access to the castle's entire library, to the forbidden texts she had spent years secretly deciphering. Her finger, trembling slightly, traced the faint glowing lines of a map she had copied from one such text. It was a map of the castle's deepest levels, its foundations. Her finger hovered over a circular chamber deep within the dungeon, a place marked with a symbol of contained power. The old text spoke of it, a place of immense magical energy, a source, a wellspring. It was forbidden, a place no one had entered for a century. But the whispers in the ancient script promised power, power that might be enough to reignite her fading heart. There has to be another way, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp in the oppressive silence. The old text spoke of a power deep within the castle's foundation. The moonlight outside seemed to brighten, a malevolent, watching presence that judged her and found her wanting. It was a promise of death. The dungeon was a promise of the unknown. With her choices narrowed to a certainty and a sliver of a chance, she knew she had to descend. The journey downward was a descent into the castle's forgotten history. Astrid pulled her thin cloak tighter, a single flickering torch held aloft in her trembling hand. She moved through secret passages, her knowledge gleaned from dusty manuscripts guiding her where guards and servants would never tread. She pressed a loose stone in the back of a supply closet, and a section of the wall groaned open, revealing a narrow, winding staircase spiraling down into utter blackness. The air immediately changed. The familiar scent of dust and old tapestries was replaced by a cold, damp smell of wet stone and something else, something metallic and wild, like the scent of a storm or fresh blood. The flickering torchlight threw monstrous shadows that danced and writhed on the stone walls, twisting her own frail form into a grotesque caricature. Each step was a monumental effort. Her heart, a faint and distant drum, pounded weakly in her chest, a pathetic rhythm against the profound, echoing silence of the deep earth. She had to pause every dozen steps, leaning her shoulder against the cold, weeping stone, her lungs burning. "Just a little further," she panted, the words turning to vapor in the frigid air. Her determination was a hot, sharp point of light in the vast, encroaching darkness of her physical failure. Her body screamed for her to turn back, to lie down and let the inevitable take her. But the image of the map, of that chamber of power, was burned into her mind. It was her last hope, and she would crawl to it if she had to. The spiral staircase eventually opened into a long, straight corridor, the walls slick with moisture that glittered in the torchlight. The metallic, lupine scent was stronger here, mingled with the sharp, clean smell of ozone. The scent of raw, contained magic. The air hummed, a low vibration that she felt in her bones, a thrum of power that both terrified and thrilled her. It was real. The texts had not lied. At the end of the corridor was a heavy, iron-bound door, not locked, but held shut by its own immense weight. It took all of her remaining strength to pull it open, the screech of its ancient hinges a scream in the silence. She stumbled through the opening and into a vast, circular chamber, and she froze. In the center of the chamber was a single, heavily barred cell. It was a masterpiece of magical imprisonment. The bars were not iron, but thick, gleaming silver that seemed to drink the torchlight. The entire cell, floor to ceiling, was lined with the same polished metal, and embedded within the walls were veins of moonstone, pulsing with a faint, ethereal light of their own. It was a cage of silver and light, beautiful and terrible. And inside, there was a man. He was shackled to the far wall, his wrists and ankles bound by heavy silver chains that snaked across the floor and disappeared into the wall itself. He was massive, a giant of a man whose broad shoulders and powerful build spoke of incredible strength, yet his posture was one of utter defeat. His head was bowed, a curtain of long, dark hair obscuring his face. He wore only a pair of ragged trousers, and his skin was a roadmap of old scars. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He might have been a statue, a monument to forgotten sorrow. The stories said the dungeons were empty, but this man was clearly a prisoner of immense importance to warrant such a cage. He was, she realized with a jolt, the reason this place was forbidden. He was the ancient power source. As she took a hesitant step closer, her worn boots scuffing softly on the stone floor, a strange resonance vibrated through the chamber. It was not the humming of the wards, but something new, something that centered on her. A flicker of impossible warmth bloomed in her chest, a momentary easing of the icy grip around her heart. It was like the first breath after being held underwater, a shocking, life-affirming jolt. In the same instant, the man in the cell lifted his head. He moved slowly, as if rousing from a long slumber, and two eyes, glowing with a faint but distinct amber light, fixed on her. He had sensed her, felt her presence as surely as she had felt the strange surge of life. His voice, when it came, was a low growl, rusty and cracked from long disuse, a sound that vibrated through the very stone beneath her feet. "Who are you?" he demanded, the words scraping his throat. "No one is allowed here." Astrid flinched, startled by the sound, but the lingering warmth in her chest gave her a sliver of courage. The connection she felt was undeniable, a tangible thread pulling her toward the caged man. I was looking for a way to save myself," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I am Astrid." Her gaze fell from his glowing eyes to the raw, chafed skin around his silver shackles, the flesh red and inflamed where the metal bit into him. A pang of empathy, sharp and unexpected, cut through her own fear and desperation. "What have they done to you?" The amber glow in his eyes intensified, a pair of smoldering coals in the gloom. He studied her, this frail creature who had breached his solitude, this woman who smelled of dying herbs and desperate hope. The question she asked, "What have they done to you?" hung in the air, so absurdly compassionate that it almost made him laugh. The sound would have been a terrible, broken thing. Instead, he shifted, the movement sending a symphony of metallic groans through the chamber, as the silver chains scraped against his skin and the stone floor. The raw, inflamed flesh at his wrists and ankles screamed in protest, a constant, fiery agony he had long ago learned to ignore. He had not been asked a question born of pity in a century. "They have made me a king," he finally answered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, a sound of gravel and disuse. He gestured with a slight tilt of his head to the opulent cage surrounding him. "This is my throne, a cage of silver to protect my pack from their king." He had once ruled from a throne of carved oak and velvet, surrounded by loyal warriors. Now, his kingdom was this circle of polished metal and mocking, magical light, his only subjects the shadows that danced beyond the bars. He watched her, waiting for the fear to dawn, for her to recoil from the monster in the cage, but she only drew a step closer, her brow furrowed not in terror, but in a deep, searching concentration. "The moon," she whispered, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "It's the moon, isn't it?" He gave a short, harsh nod. "My bloodline is cursed. For generations, the Alpha King has been blessed with unrivaled strength, but it comes at a price. Under the light of the full moon, that strength becomes a mindless, uncontrollable rage. I become a beast, a danger to everyone and everything I am sworn to protect." He looked away from her, his gaze fixed on the moonstone veins in the wall. "This cell, the silver, it dampens my power, contains the transformation. It is a grim inheritance, a duty passed from father to son, to be chained, to be isolated, to protect our people from ourselves." As he spoke of the moon's power, of the curse that defined his existence, Astrid felt the truth of his words resonate deep within her own failing body. It was a sympathetic vibration, a terrible harmony between their two afflictions. The cold dread in her chest, the weakness in her limbs, it all pulsed in time with his bitter confession. "The moon is my executioner," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "It drains my life, little by little. With every cycle, my heart grows weaker. The healers say this one will be my last." She looked from his powerful, shackled form to her own pale, trembling hands. They were opposites, a study in contrasts, yet they were both being destroyed by the same celestial body. "When I came near you, I felt stronger. Just for a moment." She pressed a hand to her chest, over the place where the impossible warmth had bloomed. It was like a fire had been lit inside me. Damon's amber eyes snapped back to her, the glow within them flaring with a new, intense curiosity. He had felt it too. The moment she had entered the chamber, the constant, gnawing drain of the silver and moonstone had lessened. A sliver of his own immense power, usually suppressed to a bare flicker, had surged back into him. It was why he had even been able to lift his head, to speak. For 100 years, this cell had been a place of slow decay, of draining power and sanity. Now, for the first time, something new had entered the equation. Her presence was like a drop of water on a parched tongue, a fleeting moment of relief that only made the thirst more agonizing. The atmosphere between them, once thick with his solitary misery and her desperate fear, was now charged with a dawning, terrifying spark of shared experience, a fragile bridge of hope built between two souls drowning in the same sea. His initial suspicion was being replaced by a profound, aching pity for the frail woman who was his curse's reflection. Suddenly, a deep, groaning scrape echoed from the far end of the corridor, the sound of the heavy iron door being dragged open. Damon's head shot up, his entire body going rigid, the fragile connection between them shattered, replaced by a sudden, sharp alarm. "Hide," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "Now. No one can know you are here." Astrid didn't hesitate. The authority in his voice was absolute. She scrambled into the deepest shadows of the chamber, pressing herself into a narrow alcove behind a pile of fallen stones and rubble, pulling her dark cloak tight around her. She held her breath, her heart beginning its frantic, weak flutter once more. From her hiding place, she had a clear view of the cell and the entrance to the chamber. The footsteps that followed were slow, deliberate, punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic tap of wood on stone. A figure emerged from the corridor, silhouetted against the distant torchlight. It was a woman, tall and severe, her silver hair pulled back in a tight, intricate knot. She wore the dark, formal robes of a pack elder, and in her hand, she carried a staff of polished rowan wood, its end striking the floor with each step. This was Elder Lyra, a woman whose face was known and respected throughout the pack, a figure of wisdom and tradition. But as she entered the chamber, the air grew colder. The faint warmth Astrid had felt completely extinguished, replaced by a chilling, clinical austerity. Lyra's eyes, the color of slate, swept the chamber before landing on Damon. There was no warmth in her gaze, no pity, only a cold, appraising look, like a physician examining a particularly troublesome disease. She walked a slow circle around the cell, her staff tapping, tapping, tapping on the stone. She ran a wrinkled hand over the silver bars, inspecting the integrity of the magical wards that pulsed faintly around them. Her demeanor was not that of a concerned caretaker, but of a meticulous jailer, ensuring her prison was secure. "The moon will be at its peak tomorrow night, Damon," she said, her voice as cold and smooth as river stone. "You must be strong. You know what happens when you fight the chains." Her words were a reminder, but they sounded like a threat, laced with a grim, almost eager satisfaction. She seemed to be looking forward to his suffering, to the proof of his monstrosity that would reaffirm the necessity of her control. From the shadows, Astrid felt a surge of protective anger, so fierce and unexpected it almost made her gasp. She saw the deep-seated cruelty that lay beneath the elder's respected facade. Lyra wasn't just upholding a tradition for the good of the pack. She seemed to relish Damon's subjugation. Damon, for his part, met Lyra's cold gaze with a defiant fire of his own. He pushed himself up straighter against the wall, the movement pulling at his chains, making them sing a song of protest. The amber glow in his eyes was no longer just a sign of his nature. It was a burning ember of rebellion in the face of her oppressive presence. "One day these chains will break," he growled, the sound low and dangerous. "And I will have my revenge on this curse." Lyra's thin lips curved into a semblance of a smile, a cold, cruel expression that did not reach her eyes. "The curse is our shield, Damon. It keeps the beast contained. It keeps the pack safe. Your sacrifice is your honor." She gave the bars one last proprietary pat. "Do not forget that." Without another word, she turned, her staff tapping its sharp, unnerving rhythm as she departed, the heavy iron door groaning shut behind her, plunging the chamber back into its familiar, oppressive silence. The tension she had brought with her lingered, a poisonous miasma in the air. For a long moment after she was gone, the only sound was the faint drip of water and the ragged edge of Damon's breathing. Slowly, Astrid emerged from her hiding place, her body trembling not from weakness, but from a shared indignation. She was shaken, but her fear had been burned away by the cold fire of Lyra's malice, replaced by a new, steely resolve. She walked back towards the cell, her eyes meeting Damon's. "She enjoys this," Astrid said, her voice low and fierce. "She doesn't want to protect the pack. She wants to control you." Damon nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "She is the descendant of the elder who first forged these chains. Her family has been my family's jailers for generations. She believes it is her sacred duty." "It's more than duty," Astrid insisted, her mind racing, connecting the coldness in Lyra's eyes to the ancient, forbidden texts she had spent her life studying. A passage from a crumbling, leather-bound grimoire flashed in her memory, a book she had found hidden in a loose wall cavity in the library. It spoke of a great betrayal, of a jealous sorceress who had cursed two powerful lovers from rival families, twisting their destinies into a shared tragedy. "I read something in a forbidden text," she began, her voice quickening with excitement. "It described two linked curses, cast upon the founding members of two ancient bloodlines. One curse was of the fading heart, which drained the life from its victim with every full moon. The other was of the raging beast, which stole the mind and soul, leaving only uncontrollable fury in its wake." Damon's eyes widened, the amber glow pulsing. He leaned forward, the chains groaning in protest, his attention fixed entirely on her. "What were the names of these families?" he asked, his voice tight with a terrible, dawning urgency. Astrid's breath hitched. "The family of the fading heart was Vale. My family." She swallowed hard. "The family of the raging beast was Hale." A profound silence fell over the chamber, a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped turning. Damon stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock, horror, and something else, a wild, frantic hope. He knew the name. It was the name of his ancestors, the first Alpha King to bear the curse. The realization dawned on them both at the same time. A seismic, world-altering truth that crashed down with the force of an avalanche. Their curses were not separate afflictions. They were two halves of a single, ancient spell, a malevolent piece of magic designed to keep their bloodlines apart forever. Her presence soothed his beast not by chance, but by design. His power gave her strength not as a fluke, but as a fundamental property of their intertwined doom. Damon looked from her pale, determined face to the silver chains that bound him, a new, terrifying light of understanding in his eyes. He pulled at his shackles, not with mindless rage, but with a sudden, desperate purpose, the metal groaning under the strain. The clinking of his chains no longer sounded like a symbol of defeat, but like a challenge, a call to arms. "Then my weakness is your death," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and your weakness is my prison." He met her gaze, and in that moment, they were no longer strangers, no longer a monster and a ghost. They were two sides of the same cursed coin. "We have been killing each other without ever meeting." The words settled in the humming air between them, heavy and absolute. The truth, once spoken, was an irrevocable force, reshaping the very foundations of their reality. They were not two separate tragedies, but a single, unified catastrophe playing out across a century of solitude and a lifetime of decay. The air in the dungeon, once merely cold and oppressive, was now charged with a mix of abject terror and a wild, defiant exhilaration. They were no longer just a cursed king and a dying woman. They were a team, partners in a doom that had finally revealed its face. Astrid's mind, a library of hoarded, forbidden knowledge, began to work with a speed and clarity she hadn't felt in years. The surge of vitality from Damon's presence had not just warmed her heart. Fragments of text, images of diagrams, and half-remembered incantations swirled in her memory, not as a chaotic jumble, but as pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "The sorceress who cast the curse," Astrid began, her voice no longer a fragile whisper but a tool of scholarly precision. She was thorough. She didn't just want to separate the families, she wanted to make their suffering a monument to her jealousy. But in every text about such powerful, symbiotic curses, there is always a mention of an undoing. The magic is based on balance. What is bound together can, in theory, be unbound. She paced the small area in front of his cell, her worn boots scuffing the dusty floor. She was no longer a frail victim succumbing to her fate. She was a scholar on the verge of a breakthrough, her own life the subject of her most critical research. She traced a complex, spiraling symbol in the dust with the toe of her boot, an image she recalled from the grimoire's margins. The counter, ritual, it's dangerous. It requires the two cursed descendants to willingly bind their fates. Not in opposition, but in unity. It has to be done under the full moon, at the very moment it reaches its zenith, when both curses are at their absolute peak of power. Damon watched her, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. The raw, physical agony of the silver chains was a distant hum compared to the roaring inferno of hope and fear in his chest. For 100 years, he had known nothing but this cage, this cycle of torment and isolation. The idea of an end, any end, was a fantasy he had long since abandoned. "Dangerous how?" he pressed, his voice low and steady. Astrid stopped pacing and met his gaze, her own eyes dark with the gravity of her discovery. "The ritual channels the power of the full moon, the very power that fuels our curses. It attempts to invert the magic, to turn the poison into an antidote. If it works, it should shatter the spell. If it fails, it will channel that peak power directly into us. It would be like pouring oil onto a fire. Your transformation would be instantaneous and permanent, a true beast without a mind. And my heart," she touched her chest, "it would simply stop. It would kill us both, instantly." The silence that followed was absolute. The choice was stark, a razor's edge between total freedom and absolute annihilation. For Damon, it wasn't a choice at all. He had been dying in this cell for a century, a slow, agonizing decay of spirit. The thought of a quick, Final death while fighting for a chance at life, at freedom, at a future with the woman who was his other half, was not a risk, it was a gift. He gripped the silver bars, his knuckles white, the metal seeming to hiss at his touch. "I have been willing to die in this cell for years, Astrid," he said, his voice resonating with a conviction that shook the very air. "To die fighting with you is a privilege. Tell me what we must do." Astrid's heart swelled with a fierce, powerful emotion. His trust, his immediate and unwavering faith in her, was a force more potent than any magic. They were a team. The realization solidified. No longer a fragile hope, but a core of unshakable certainty. She moved closer to the bars, the space between them charged with their shared purpose. Her hand rose, and his did as well, mirroring the gesture. Their fingers didn't quite touch, separated by the cold, hard reality of the silver bars, but the pact was sealed in that space between them, a silent, binding oath. "It requires a shared heart," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "A willing bond, a declaration of unity, and a sacrifice of blood." The full moon began its ascent, its ethereal light starting to creep through a high, grated window near the chamber's ceiling, a slow, silver tide that promised to drown them. As its influence grew, the temporary strength Astrid had felt began to wane, the cold seeping back into her bones with a vengeance. The curse was reasserting its dominion, fighting against the foreign power of Damon's presence. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so powerful it stole her breath. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed against the bars of the cell, her body slumping like a marionette with its strings cut. Her breathing became a series of shallow, desperate gasps. The cold was no longer just a sensation. It was a physical presence inside her, freezing her heart from within. "Astrid." Damon's voice was a sharp crack of alarm. He saw the life draining from her, her skin taking on a deathly, translucent pallor in the encroaching moonlight. In the same instant, he felt the familiar, agonizing pull of his own transformation. A fire ignited in his veins, a rage that was not his own, screaming for release. The veins on his arms bulged, standing out like thick cords against his skin, and a low, guttural growl escaped his lips against his will. The beast was coming, clawing its way to the surface, eager to revel in the moon's power. For a century, he had let it come, succumbing to the inevitable agony. But not now. Now, he had something to fight for. Seeing Astrid's fragile form pressed against the bars, her life fading before his eyes, became his anchor in the storm of his own curse. He focused his will, a feat of mental discipline he hadn't attempted in decades, pushing back against the monstrous instinct. He would not let the beast take him, not when she needed him. He reached a hand through the bars, the movement shaking with the monumental effort of his resistance. The silver of the bars seared his skin, but he ignored the pain. He couldn't break the chains, not yet, but he could reach her. He could touch her. With a final, shuddering effort, he placed his large, warm hand over her chest, directly over her failing heart. A jolt, powerful and electric, shot between them. It was not the gentle warmth from before, but a raw, untamed surge of energy. Astrid gasped as a wave of potent, primal strength flooded her body, pushing back the encroaching ice, forcing her heart into a stronger, steadier rhythm. It was his strength, his raw, alpha power, a torrent of life pouring into her. For Damon, the contact was a shock of a different kind. As his power flowed into her, her essence flowed back into him. It was a feeling of calm, of peace, a gentle coolness that soothed the raging fire in his veins. The beast within, which had been roaring for release, quieted to a low growl, its fury dampened by the soft, steady presence of her spirit. He felt a moment of impossible clarity, his mind his own again. "It's so cold," Astrid whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes fluttering open to look at him. His face was inches from hers, separated only by the bars. His features were taut with strain, but his amber eyes, glowing with contained power, were fixed on her with a raw, desperate tenderness. "Fight it, Astrid," he commanded, his own voice strained, a low growl of effort. "Feel my strength. Take it. We are not separate anymore." The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, born not of romance, but of a shared, desperate struggle for survival. The warmth of his hand against the cold fabric of her dress, the sound of his ragged, controlled breathing mingling with her own strengthening heartbeat, the way the fierce amber glow in his eyes softened as he looked at her. All of it forged a bond deeper than any physical chain. This was the first time their connection had been physically affirmed, a desperate, life-giving touch in the heart of their shared prison. Far above them, in a tower study filled with the cold, precise order of dark knowledge, Elder Lyra felt the shift. Her private study was a stark contrast to the chaotic hope of Astrid's room, a place of polished obsidian, neatly organized scrolls, and ancient artifacts that hummed with a malevolent energy. She stood before a wide, shallow bowl carved from a single piece of black marble, filled to the brim with dark, still water. Her face, a mask of stern control, was illuminated by the eerie purple glow of a single candle whose flame did not flicker. She was performing a scrying ritual, a routine check on the magical wards that contained the Alpha King, a task her family had performed for generations. As she chanted the low, guttural words of power, ripples spread across the water's surface. Usually, the image that formed was a faint, pulsing web of blue light, the magical signature of the dungeon's wards, strained and agitated by Damon's power as the full moon approached. But tonight, something was different. She leaned closer, her slate, gray eyes narrowing. The wards were not just strained. She could see a new resonance, a second, fainter light weaving itself into the familiar blue web. It was a harmony, a sympathetic vibration she had never seen before. The wards were not just being battered, they were being changed, harmonized with an outside influence. An anomaly, she whispered, her voice a sliver of ice. Her mind, as sharp and cold as a shard of glass, raced through the possibilities. This was not a simple power fluctuation. This was the signature of two magical forces interacting, one of them foreign to the dungeon. After all these years of perfect, predictable containment, something or someone had broken the seal. Her suspicion, a cold, coiling serpent, rose in her gut. Someone else was in the dungeon. The thought was almost inconceivable, yet the evidence floated before her in the dark water, and with that thought came a deeper, more profound fear. She remembered the whispers of a prophecy, a fragment of lore she had worked for decades to suppress, to erase from the pack's history, a prophecy that spoke of the curses breaking, of the two bloodlines reuniting, of the coming of the fading heart to the raging beast. Her power, her family's influence, the entire rigid order of the pack was built upon the foundation of Damon's curse. A free king, an alpha in full command of his immense power, would have no need for an elder whose primary role was to be his jailer. He would be a threat to her control, to the generations of power she had so carefully cultivated. She was a descendant of the very sorceress who had cast the curse, and she had dedicated her life to perpetuating it, framing it as a necessary sacrifice for the good of the pack. Staring into the scrying bowl, at the undeniable evidence of an outside presence harmonizing with her prisoner, she felt a surge of cold, calculated fury. Her face, reflected in the dark water, was a mask of pure malice. After all these years, she hissed to the empty room, her voice trembling with rage. No, the prophecy will not come to pass. The curse will hold. She slammed her hand down on the stone table beside the bowl, the sound cracking through the silent study. I will ensure it. The hope that had just begun to bloom in the darkness below was about to face its first and perhaps final storm. The surge of life from Damon's touch was a roaring fire in Astrid's veins, a stark and glorious contrast to the creeping ice that had defined her existence. The weakness had not vanished, it was merely held at bay, a predator waiting just beyond the firelight. But for now, she was whole, she was strong. The moon was climbing higher, its silver light now a palpable presence in the chamber, pouring through the high grate like a liquid judgment. Time was running out. Every moment of borrowed strength was a grain of sand slipping through the hourglass. She looked at Damon, at the raw determination etched onto his face, and knew they had to act. The quiet strategy session that followed was held in low, urgent tones, a conspiracy whispered in the heart of a forgotten prison. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and their shared resolve. The ritual requires two foci, Astrid explained, her voice clear and steady. She knelt before the bars, her mind a whirlwind of ancient lore, now sharpened to a razor's edge. A piece of the prison and a piece of the power that sustains it. We need a shard of the moonstone from the cell wall. And she looked at the heavy silver chains that bound him, her gaze unflinching. We need a piece of the silver from your chains. Damon followed her gaze. The silver was his torment, a constant source of burning agony that sapped his strength and sanity. The idea of willingly focusing on it, of using it, was repellent. The moonstone, I understand. But the silver? It's what holds the curse in place. Exactly, Astrid affirmed, her eyes bright with intellectual fire. The curse is a knot of magic, and these are its two anchors. The moonstone amplifies the moon's power, feeding the beast. The silver contains the beast, but also poisons the man. To undo the knot, we must pull on both threads at once. The ritual will use the silver not as a chain, but as a conduit, and the moonstone not as a lens for the curse, but as a prism to shatter it. She took a deep breath, the reality of what she was about to ask of him settling heavily in her chest. When the transformation peaks, your strength will be absolute, but your mind will be lost to the rage. You must use that moment, that peak of monstrous power, not to fight the chains, but to break off a single link. It's a monumental risk. It could exhaust the very power we need for the ritual itself, or the focus required might be impossible. Damon stared at his own hands, at the scarred flesh around the silver manacles. He thought of the countless full moons he had endured, the blind, screaming rage that consumed him, the feeling of his own consciousness being shredded and devoured by a mindless beast. When the change comes, the rage is all I know, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. To focus it, to control it for a single purpose, I have never done that before. I'm not sure it's possible. Astrid reached through the bars, her fingers brushing against the cold metal, inches from his hand. You won't be alone this time, she said, her voice soft but infused with an unshakable certainty. I will be with you. I will be your anchor. When the beast comes, you listen for my voice. I will guide you back to yourself. The trust between them was now absolute, a living thing that filled the space between them. They were partners, their lives held in the precarious balance of their shared will. While Damon mentally prepared for the ordeal to come, Astrid turned her attention to the cell walls. She ran her hands over the cool, smooth surface of the moonstone veins, searching for a flaw, a crack, a place where she could pry a piece free. Her fingers, now steady and sure, traced the lines of light, her scholar's mind assessing the ancient construction. She found it near the floor, a small, jagged fissure where a larger moonstone met the silver lining of the cell, a tiny imperfection in the otherwise flawless prison. It would have to be enough. The change began not with a roar, but with a tremor. It started deep within Damon's bones, a violent shudder that shook his entire frame. The air grew thick, heavy with a sudden spike of raw, untamed power. The silver chains that bound him began to glow, first a dull red, then a brighter, angrier orange, heating as his cursed blood reacted to the moon's zenith. A low growl tore from his throat, no longer human, but the sound of a predator cornered and enraged. His body contorted, muscles bunching and twisting under his skin as the transformation hit him with its full, cataclysmic force. The beast within, silent for a moment, now roared for release, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that echoed off the stone walls. The silver chains burned his skin, the smell of ozone and scorched flesh filling the air. His amber eyes, once filled with tenderness and hope, were now consumed by a blazing, mindless inferno. Astrid, standing just outside the bars, did not flinch. She held her ground as the wave of his rage washed over her, a palpable force of psychic violence. This was the monster Lyra spoke of, the beast the pack feared. But Astrid saw only the man, the king, trapped within the inferno. She pressed her hands against the cold bars, grounding herself. Damon, she said, her voice calm and steady, a clear, cool note in the symphony of his agony. It's me, Astrid. I am here. Do not let it take you. The beast roared, thrashing against the chains, its eyes seeing nothing but the cage that held it. Remember the goal, Damon, she continued, her voice rising slightly, cutting through the haze of his pain. Remember our future. You are not a monster. You are a king. Focus the rage. Don't fight it. Use it. one link, for us. Her voice was a thread, a single, slender line of reason in a maelstrom of instinct and agony. Deep within the beast's consciousness, Damon heard her. It was a whisper at first, nearly drowned out by the roaring in his own head, but it was there. Astrid. The goal. For us. He clung to the words, to the sound of her voice, using it as a shield against the all-consuming rage. With a monumental effort of will, an act of control he had never before achieved, he stopped thrashing. He focused the entirety of the beast's monstrous, fueled strength not on the chains as a whole, but on a single link of the heavy silver chain connected to his right wrist. He grabbed it with his left hand, the searing heat of the metal hissing as it met his flesh. He ignored it. He pulled. A guttural roar of pure, focused effort ripped from his throat, a sound that was both beast and man. The link groaned, the metal straining under the impossible pressure. It began to glow white, hot, the magic of the curse fighting against his will. Astrid continued her chant, her voice a steady rhythm against his explosive effort. One link, Damon. Break the cage. Be free. With a final deafening crack that sounded like thunder in the enclosed space, the link snapped. A small, crescent-shaped piece of white, hot silver broke off and clattered to the stone floor, glowing like a fallen star. The effort was catastrophic. The wave of power receded as quickly as it had come, leaving Damon gasping, his body trembling with exhaustion. The transformation, cheated of its full expression, fell back, and his human consciousness, victorious and utterly spent, surfaced once more. He slumped against his remaining chains, his head bowed, his chest heaving. The amber in his eyes was soft again, the fire banked, and it was filled with a weary, triumphant love as he looked at Astrid. She felt a surge of awe so powerful it was almost painful, a love for his incredible strength of will that stole her breath away. Just as Astrid bent down, her fingers closing around the still, hot shard of silver, a grating screech echoed from the end of the corridor. The heavy iron door was being thrown open. Her head snapped up, her heart plummeting. She had the silver. She had located the moonstone. They were so close. A moment later, Elder Lyra swept into the chamber, her face a mask of cold, triumphant fury. She was not alone. Flanked by two large, grim-faced guards in pack livery, she looked like a dark queen come to pass judgment. Her slate, gray eyes took in the scene in an instant. The exhausted king in his chains, the frail woman standing before him, the glowing piece of silver on the floor. I knew it. Lyra's voice was a venomous whisper that cut through the silence. The forbidden child, the fading heart. You will not undo centuries of order. She advanced, her rowan staff striking the floor with sharp, angry cracks. The guards moved with her, fanning out to cut off any chance of escape. Lyra stopped just feet from Astrid, her eyes burning with a cold fire. She finally revealed the true depth of her motive, the truth that went beyond mere control. The curse is a gift, she hissed, her voice dropping low, thick with a fanatical conviction. It culls the weak. It ensures only the strong survive. My ancestor, the sorceress you would call a villain, she understood that. She bound the Hale bloodline to the moon to keep their power in check, to prevent a single Alpha from ever becoming a tyrant. Her lips twisted into a cruel smile. And I have continued her great work. A free king is a threat to the stability I have maintained. He is a monster, a beast to be caged. This is for the good of the pack. Damon roared in fury, a sound of pure, impotent rage. He rattled his remaining chains, pulling against them with all his depleted strength. But he was too weak from his earlier effort. The chains held firm. He could only watch, helpless, as Lyra's trap closed around them. Seize her, Lyra commanded the guards, her voice ringing with absolute authority. The two warriors advanced on Astrid, their faces grim and resolved. Astrid stood her ground, her small frame trembling but her spirit unbroken. In one hand, she clutched the shard of silver, its heat a painful, grounding reality. With her other, she pointed towards the fissure in the wall where she had found the loose moonstone. She had everything they needed, but it was all about to be lost. She lifted her chin, meeting Lyra's hateful gaze with a defiance born of desperation and love. You're wrong. Astrid's voice rang out, clear and strong, a bell of truth in the oppressive atmosphere. He is a king, and we will be free. The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, their grim resolve faltering in the face of such impossible defiance. It was all the time Astrid needed. With a flick of her wrist, she flung a small cloth-wrapped pouch from her belt not at the guards, but into the flickering orange flame of a nearby torch sconce. The pouch contained a volatile mixture of dried bog moss and powdered shimmer fungus, a concoction she had once experimented with to create signal fires. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The pouch erupted with a loud times whoosh asterisk, spewing a cloud of thick, acrid, silver-gray smoke that billowed outwards with astonishing speed. It didn't just obscure, it choked, the smoke stinging the eyes and catching in the throat. The guards, caught completely by surprise, recoiled, coughing and sputtering, their hands flying to their faces. They stumbled back, momentarily blinded and disoriented, their military discipline dissolving into panicked confusion. Lyra let out a furious, strangled cry, waving a hand in front of her face to ward off the noxious cloud. "Fools!" she shrieked, her voice muffled by the smoke and her own coughing fit. "Seize her! Don't let her complete the circle." But her command was lost in the chaos. The smoke had created the perfect diversion, a swirling wall of confusion that separated her and her men from their target. Astrid didn't waste a precious second. She used the pandemonium to scramble across the stone floor, her worn boots silent and sure. Her destination was the very center of the chamber, a spot now illuminated by a perfect, stark circle of moonlight. The light from the high grate was no longer a gentle, creeping tide. It was a solid, unwavering pillar of pure, white energy, the moon having reached its absolute zenith. It felt like stepping onto a sacred, yet incredibly dangerous stage. She fell to her knees within the circle's boundary, the cold stone a shocking contrast to the fire of adrenaline in her veins. In one hand she clutched the jagged shard of moonstone she had pried from the wall, its edges sharp and cool. In the other, she held the crescent of silver Damon had broken from his chains, still radiating a faint, malevolent heat. She looked up, through the bars, at Damon. His eyes were blazing, his entire body tense with anticipation. It was now or never. "Damon, now!" she cried, her voice cutting through the din of coughing guards and Lyra's enraged shouts. There was no time for hesitation, no room for fear. With the cold, calculating precision of a surgeon, Astrid drew the sharpest edge of the moonstone shard across her own palm. The pain was a bright, clean line of fire, and she welcomed it. It was proof of life, of blood, of a heart that was still, however faintly, beating. Dark red blood, shockingly vibrant in the pure white moonlight, welled in the cut. Without a moment's pause, she pressed her bleeding hand flat against the thick, cold silver bar directly in front of her. Damon, his eyes locked on hers, understood instantly. He mirrored her action from within the cell, placing his large, calloused hand directly over hers, the silver bar the only thing separating their flesh. The moment their hands aligned, a violent sizzle rent the air. Smoke, acrid and foul, coiled up from where their combined blood and magic met the cursed metal. It was a volatile alchemical reaction, the life force of the fading heart and the raging beast meeting upon the very conduit of their shared torment. Astrid closed her eyes for a second, drawing a deep, shuddering breath, anchoring herself in the intensity of the connection. She could feel him, his strength, his hope, his century of pain, all of it pouring into her through their joined hands. She opened her eyes and began the incantation, the words she had only ever read in a dusty, forbidden book now coming to life on her tongue. Her voice, miraculously, was not the weak, trembling thing she was used to. It was clear, strong, and resonant with a power she didn't know she possessed, a power born of absolute conviction. "Heart of shadow, soul of rage," she chanted, her voice ringing in the sudden, charged silence of the chamber. "By blood and moonlight, we break this cage." As she spoke, the silver shard and the moonstone she held, clutched in her other hand, began to glow. It was not the cold, sterile light of the moon, but a warm, golden radiance that pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. The artifacts were drinking in the power of the zenith moon, absorbing the potent magic of their shared blood and weaving it all together with the raw, desperate intent of their unified will. Lyra, recovering from the smoke, saw the golden light and her face contorted in a mask of pure horror. She raised her rowan staff, its tip glowing with a sickly purple energy. "You will not break what the ages have forged," she screamed, and began her own counter. Chant, a series of harsh, guttural words that felt like stones being ground together. Tendrils of dark, shadowy energy snaked from her staff, slithering across the floor towards the circle of light, attempting to smother the nascent ritual. "Two souls as one, our fates entwined," Astrid continued, her voice rising, refusing to be silenced. The golden light around her intensified, pushing back against Lyra's encroaching shadows. A visible wave of energy expanded from where she and Damon were joined, a shimmering dome of gold that held the darkness at bay. It was a battle of wills, of magic, of hope, against a century of carefully maintained despair. Lyra screamed in fury as her shadows recoiled from the golden light, unable to penetrate the sacred circle. Inside the dome of their combined power, there was only silence. The chaos of the chamber faded away, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the hum of immense power. Damon's amber eyes, no longer blazing with the beast's rage, were fixed on Astrid's, and in their glowing depths, she saw a universe of pain, trust, and a love so profound it was breathtaking. "Let this ancient curse be left behind," Astrid cried out the final line, her voice a triumphant crescendo that filled the chamber and seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. As the last word left her lips, the golden light radiating from the silver shard and the moonstone in her hand did not fade, it detonated. It exploded outwards in a silent, blinding wave of pure, purified magic. The light didn't harm the stone or the guards, it passed through them, but it struck Damon's remaining chains with the force of a thunderbolt. There was no clang of metal, no physical impact. Instead, the silver chains, the instruments of his century-long torment, reacted to the purified magic in a way no one could have predicted. They glowed with a brilliant, white, hot light for a single, silent second, and then, with a final deafening crack times, that echoed like the snap of a god's whip, they shattered. They didn't break into links, they disintegrated, turning into a fine, shimmering dust that rained down onto the stone floor and vanished before it even landed. The very substance of his prison had been unmade. Simultaneously, an impossible sensation flooded Astrid's body. It was not the fleeting, borrowed warmth she had felt before. This was a deep, powerful, and permanent heat that originated in her own chest. The suffocating ice of the curse, the cold that had been her constant companion since birth, was not just pushed back. It was annihilated, burned away in the fire of the ritual's success. For the first time in her life, she felt her own heartbeat. It was not a weak, frantic flutter, but a strong, steady, powerful rhythm, a drumbeat of life, thudding with a vitality that was entirely her own. The sensation was so overwhelming, so joyous, it brought tears to her eyes. She was alive, truly, completely alive. Damon was free. He stumbled forward as the last of his chains turned to dust, his body suddenly unburdened after 100 years of resistance. The heavy iron door of his cell, its silver lock melted into a molten puddle by the magical backlash, swung open with a low groan. He was no longer in his half-beast form, but was fully human, yet he radiated an immense, controlled power that seemed to make the very air around him vibrate. The curse had not just been a prison, it had been a corruption of his true nature. Now, that power was purified, whole, and entirely his. He took a single, staggering step out of the cell, his first free step in a century, and his eyes, glowing with a soft, steady amber light, never left Astrid. "No!" Lyra's shriek was thin and reedy, a sound of utter, soul-crushing defeat. "Impossible!" Her staff clattered to the floor, its dark magic extinguished. Her power, her influence, her entire world had been built upon the foundation of the curse she had so carefully maintained. In a single, brilliant flash of light, it had all been turned to dust, just like the chains. The air in the chamber was clean. The oppressive magical pressure that had suffocated it for generations was simply gone. In its place was the clean scent of stone, the faint, lingering smell of burnt herbs, and the beautiful, miraculous sound of Astrid's own strong, healthy heartbeat. Damon stood before Lyra, a king forged in a century of fire, his power a palpable, silent aura that was infinitely more intimidating than the beast's mindless rage had ever been. He was not roaring, he was not thrashing, he was simply present, whole, and free. And in his stillness, Lyra saw the totality of her failure. Her face, a moment ago a mask of fury, crumbled into a canvas of disbelief and terror. The dark magic that had been her shield and her sword for decades was gone, severed at its source, leaving her as nothing more than a frail, bitter old woman in the face of the very power she had sought to cage. The two guards, their faces pale and smeared with soot from the smoke, looked from the defeated elder to the radiant king, their minds struggling to reconcile a lifetime of doctrine with the undeniable truth before them. Astrid moved to stand beside Damon, her hand finding his. She was no longer a fading ghost, but a figure of vibrant life, her skin flushed with color, her eyes clear and bright, her heart beating a strong, steady rhythm that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence of the chamber. Her very presence was an irrefutable testament to their victory and to the depth of Lyra's deception. "You wanted a monster." Damon's voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a century of stolen life, a cold, powerful resonance that cut through the air and chilled Lyra to the bone. "You were so afraid of the beast that you never saw the king. You spoke of the pack's safety, but you only ever cared for your own power. You fed their fear, you nurtured it, you used it as a leash, not just for me, but for everyone." He took a step forward, and Lyra flinched back, her authority utterly shattered. He turned his gaze to the two guards, and his amber eyes were not filled with rage, but with a piercing, regal clarity. "For generations my family has been chained by a lie that told us our strength was a sickness. Lyra and her ancestors perpetuated this lie, hoarding power by keeping their king weak and their people afraid. The curse was never a shield, it was a cage for us all." "The curse is broken," Astrid added, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence that made the guards straighten up, their attention shifting fully to her and their rightful Alpha. "Your Alpha is free. A new era has begun." The truth, spoken with such calm certainty, landed with the force of a physical blow. The guards looked at Astrid, truly looked at her, and saw not a forbidden child but a queen, her vitality a stark contrast to the deathly pallor she must have worn when she entered. They looked at Lyra, and they no longer saw a wise elder, but a shrunken, desperate figure, her face a mask of pathetic, cornered malice. The loyalty that had been ingrained in them for a lifetime cracked and gave way to a new, more profound allegiance. Lyra, seeing the shift in her guard's eyes, knew she was lost. A strangled sob escaped her lips, and she turned to flee, her robes tangling around her ankles as she scrambled for the door. She didn't get 2 steps. One of the guards, his face set in a grim, resolute mask, moves with swift efficiency, his large hand gently but firmly closing around her upper arm. She struggled for a moment, a wild, panicked bird, before all the fight went out of her, leaving her slumped in his grip, defeated. The other guard dropped to one knee before Damon, his head bowed. "My king," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgive us, we were blind." Damon looked down at the kneeling man, and then at the trembling elder, and a deep, weary sigh escaped him. His reign of fear was over. His reign as king was just beginning. Hand in hand, they walked out of the dungeon, leaving the cold stone and the ghosts of the past behind. They didn't speak, their shared silence filled with the monumental weight of what they have just accomplished. They climbed the winding stairs of the castle's highest tower, emerging onto the wind-swept battlements just as the first hint of dawn bled across the horizon. The air up here was fresh and clean, a stark contrast to the stale, magical oppression of the dungeon. It smelled of morning dew and distant pine, the scent of a world reborn. They stood together, their fingers intertwined, and watched as the night sky bruises from black to a deep, velvety purple. The full moon, the celestial tyrant that had ruled their lives, still hung in the sky, but it was a pale, harmless ghost of its former self, its power broken, its malevolence erased by the coming day. Then the sun began its ascent. A sliver of brilliant molten gold appeared over the distant mountains, spilling vibrant colors across the sky. Pinks, oranges, and golds painted the clouds, a breathtaking spectacle of light and life that chased the last of the shadows from the stone of the castle. For Astrid, it was more than just a sunrise. It was a miracle. She leaned her head against Damon's shoulder, her body still humming with the unfamiliar sensation of a strong, healthy heart, her spirit overwhelmed with a profound, tearful gratitude. "I never thought I'd see another sunrise," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Damon wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, his own heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, of herbs and old books, and of victory hard won. "We will see every sunrise together for the rest of our lives," he murmured, his voice a low, steady promise against the vastness of the morning sky. He looked down at her, at the woman who walked into his prison, and saw not a monster, but a man. "You saved me, Astrid." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the dawn. A smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "We saved each other," she corrected him gently. There was a profound peace in this moment, a quiet, intimate stillness after the storm. The gray stone of the castle seemed to warm in the morning light. The world filled with infinite possibility and a deep, abiding love that had been forged in darkness and now stood, unbreakable, in the light. They were two halves of a whole, their curses undone, their futures a blank page waiting to be written together. Weeks later, the great hall of the castle was unrecognizable. Where once there were shadows and a heavy, fearful silence, there was now light and life. Sunlight streamed through the high-arched windows, illuminating colorful banners that hang from the rafters, depicting a snarling wolf and a blooming heart, intertwined. The hall was filled to capacity with the members of the pack, their faces turned not with fear or suspicion, but with a palpable sense of admiration and joyous respect towards the dais at the front of the room. Damon stood there, not as a prisoner in rags, but as their true Alpha King. He was dressed in fine, dark leathers, a simple silver circlet resting on his brow, the only symbol of his station. He radiated a calm, confident power that commanded loyalty far more effectively than fear ever could. And beside him, her hand held firmly in his, stood Astrid, his queen. She wore a simple gown of deep forest green that brought out the vibrant life in her eyes. She was no longer a ghost haunting the castle's forgotten corners. She was a pillar of strength and wisdom at its very heart. Damon raised a hand, and a respectful silence fell over the hall. "For generations," he began, his voice clear and powerful, echoing through the vast space, "we have been ruled by fear. Fear of the moon, fear of our own power, fear of a curse that was born from hatred and perpetuated by a lust for control." His gaze swept across the faces of his people, and he saw not subjects, but family. That age is over. The chains of the past have been broken, not by rage, but by courage, not by a single alpha, but by a bond that proved stronger than any curse. He squeezed Astrid's hand, his amber eyes softening as he looked at her. "Today, we are ruled by love, unity, and strength. My queen and I are living proof that no chain is unbreakable, and that no darkness is so complete that it cannot be banished by the light of two souls refusing to give up on each other." A roar of approval erupted from the pack, a joyous, unified sound that shook the very stones of the castle. It was the sound of a people set free, a people united behind a king and queen they not only respect, but love. Damon smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and he turned to Astrid. In the midst of the cheering crowd, they were in their own world. His partner, his savior, his queen, and his heart was full. Their smiles reflected their shared victory, their hard, won peace, and the promise of 1,000 sunrises yet to come. The story of the cursed king and the fading girl was over. The legend of the Alpha and his queen had just begun.